know what to do. Should I keep going to see this shrink? Do I need to stop taking my meds? Am I at fault for, this depression that I can't shake? If I could just get it together and snap out of it and buck up, I would be all right, but I can't buck up. So what's wrong with me? And prayer's not helping me. So having mixed emotions. They talked about music and faith. That's a whole other topic. It's interesting how our young people blend these things together. And then they talked about aspects of church where they said, well, it doesn't hurt, it might help, I might as well try it. The only one I'm going to cover is religion is treatment incentive. So now I got to show my age with my glasses. Okay. I'm too vain, but I got to put them on so I can see. So vanity doesn't trump me being able to see. All right, so what the young people said is that often they see religious involvement as an endorsement for treatment seeking, either through some of the beliefs that are touted within the church or the interactions with the elders, right? Where they do find that sometimes people in the church will encourage them to seek help. That, to me, that is a scientific gem, because that gives you a point of intervention. If the young people are telling us that senior leaders in the church are sometimes the reason I go get help, we probably need to be partnering with senior leaders in the church to help them understand how to be good conduits, right? And so that's why I love this work so much, because for me, it's giving me a roadmap. It's giving us a roadmap. All right. So what they say, this is a direct quote: religion might help somebody go to a counselor, because if they were thinking of hurting themselves, they need a counselor. And their religion might be telling them what to do, right? They have this thing in some communities where they say suicide is a sin, right? So for some young people, you can interpret that any number of different ways. But for some young people, what that may mean is, well, I don't want to sin, so I want to go get help, so I won't do this thing, right? And so, thank you, Sister. Amen. All right. So it's just one of those things where I think we have to pay attention to what our young people are telling us, and then find ways to use that information to create innovative ways to reduce stigma and increase the likelihood of someone going to see a mental health professional. All right. So where are we now? Doing pretty good on time. All right. We just published another study. Well, actually, it's a publication of what we found, what I just described. And so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what some of those findings, well, I told you what the findings were, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about the application, right? And so essentially, in terms of religiosity, spirituality, and we do try to define the distinctions between the two because they're not the same thing. Religiosity is more sort of your operationalization of your faith, like going to church, participating in different things, whereas spirituality is more the internal relationship you have with whoever the higher power is, and how you interpret that. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with going to a physical building or being in a physical space to worship or practice your faith. All right, so part of what we wanted to do was build on the young people's knowledge of how to connect and engage with Black youth specifically through the faith community and through their culture, making it culturally congruent, making it fit for them. And so one of the things they told us, this is going way back to the beginning when we started, was, everybody calls me Dr. Alfred, what the teenagers do because they say blue and local is too much to pronounce. They say authenticity is key, right? So if I think I'm hip, and I'm talking about LL Cool J, the rapper, not the actor on NCIS. He was a rapper before he was an actor, okay? One of the greatest of all time, I think. But if I'm talking about him, and they are not feeling LL Cool J, they think Drake and Lil Wayne, like that's who's hot, and Future, who I still can't figure out what he's saying, but anyway, that's who they like, then I have to either sit down and listen to the music and know what I'm talking about, or I have to leave it alone. I can't pretend that that's something that I'm interested in if it's not, right? Because then I'm inauthentic. So it's okay for me to like LL Cool J. They don't think I'm corny, but it's okay for me to like LL Cool J. I just need to own my space and name the truth for me. And if I can do that, then we can connect around a mutual level of hip hop. But I'm old school, and there was hot. Right? So which is how they look at it, right? So I think that's really what they were trying to communicate, what we found and what we understood from looking at our data. Okay. So essentially, for underserved youth, in our case, Black and African American youth, we think that faith-based mental health promotion feels safe for these young people. Sometimes church is the only place they feel safe, not always. Sometimes church is the place that hurts them, right? Particularly for my LGBTQ, gender non-conforming young people of color. church is not always a welcoming space, right? But for a good number of our young people, church is the one place in their lives that feel safe. It's culturally congruent, and we've discussed the history of success for health promotion, and it gives us access to a broad range of folks. All right. So, who are we missing? Okay, and why do I have this slide? Because every time I submit a grant and talk about faith-based health promotion, this is what comes back. These are the people you're not getting, right? So I'm going to own it, and I'm just going to say it. The kids who don't go to church, we're not reaching kids who are in school who don't go to church. Some of our youth, the juvenile justice system involvement, and as I mentioned earlier, just as an example, sometimes LGBTQ, non-gender conforming youth who may feel alienated from the church. So we know who we're not getting. But we want to own that and acknowledge it and try to figure out ways to bring those young people in as well. All right, so this is our publication from the second study that I just mentioned. And it just basically follows along with this idea that faith-based health promotion may be something useful for engaging our diverse young people. Okay. All right, currently, what are we doing? So these pictures, I'm going to show you this really busy slide, so I'm going to warm you up now, because when you see it, like your eyes will be like, why is she showing me all this? It's too early in the morning. But these are community partners doing a poster presentation at the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities International Conference in December. So this is what we do. We don't just publish. Our partners go with us and present. They lead the presentation, which is not a problem for me at all, because I can just sit down and not have to do anything. And down at the bottom was a training that we did where I and our research team led a training in mixed methods research. Just a basic fundamental overview. Because we talk about sustainability. When we lead, we want them to have tools they can use whether they partner with us again or not. So this was one of the things that we did in terms of trying to engage. And that was the mixed methods training. And I will also say that from that training, about half of the members, or about 10 total, about half of them ended up with, I know a lot of the researchers in the room, both community and institutional, are familiar with this city. City that, oh, thank you so much, nice man in the world, thank you so much. City.org. And City is basically a human subjects ethics training online repository. Half of our people got the training certificate from City, right? And that's something they will carry with them forever, right? Now they can say, I've been trained in human subjects research, which also allowed them to help us analyze data. So this, see, I told you, this is the busy slide. I just wanted you to see a representation of the poster that we did. It's a little bit, the font is a little bit off because we're trying to squeeze it all into one PowerPoint slide. When you print it, it looks great, but I just wanted you to see it. So this was our presentation, and the long story short behind this work, when I first came to Georgetown, the prior 10 years I spent at Duke in the Department of Psychiatry. I was recruited away to Georgetown, and when I got to Georgetown, my charge was specifically to build my research around reducing mental health disparities in African American and diverse youth. And so, through a series of, it's divine intervention, right? My path was sort of lit for me. I ended up meeting Sister Mary, who is Dr. Mary Carter Williams, who is a tireless mental health advocate. She's retired. I won't say her age. She's been retired for a long time, let me say that. And everybody called her Sister Mary, but it's one of those things, like I'm from the South, and she's doctor, so I could not call her doctor, so the best I could do was Dr. Mary. So Dr. Mary, and then Cindy Harding. Cindy is a sister with the gray hair, whom you can barely see in the picture, and Cindy's very open about her own personal struggles with depression. Right, so Cindy is a person with lived experience. So long story short, I met Dr. Mary first. We wrote a grant together as co-PIs. We were funded, and this is the result of one of the many results of our funding. We're currently working on a manuscript. The one thing I will also say that I'm very, very proud of is that Dr. Mary and Cindy are co-authors on the manuscript. Dr. Mary and I share first authorship. Cindy is second author, and one of my students is third author. And it really is just a description of the work that they've done in their community, which is based off of some of the work you do in NAMI. I can't remember which program it is. I think it might be In Our Own Voice. But they have something called the Speak Out. So our job as the academic researchers was just to come into this space with them, assess what they were doing, and sort of write it up and put it into a more concrete format. And the Speak Out was really about integrating faith into raising awareness and reducing stigma. So when I say integrate faith, I mean they prayed before they started, they prayed before they ate, they prayed at the end. People would get up and share their stories about dealing with mental illness, and we heard all kinds of stories from some of the less stigmatized forms of mental illness to some of the really challenging stories around people with severe and persistent mental illness. And people would say a scripture, and you don't get any more sort of faith-based than that. And each individual would say, this is the scripture that I use to sort of guide me. And that was their way of doing it. And so this poster is just a result of a qualitative evaluation we did around how the clergy and senior leaders in the church felt about the Speak Out program. And so I just wanted to show this is sort of CBPR in action. This is how we did it. This is a flyer, and it just lists some of the outcomes. The training that I mentioned, the community partners did 90% of the qualitative interviews for the qualitative portion of the research. We had a 110% increase in community member participation from the beginning of the award to the end, which every time was just more and more people. We also had 5 joint presentations. We did the poster that I mentioned, and we also did the manuscript. And as a result of that work, we were able to get funded on the first submission, a PCORI Pipeline to Proposal Award, for which another set of faith community members are the partners on that. And so there were a lot of outcomes from that work, and it really was a labor of love and a great effort. All right, so where are we going in the future? This is a flyer that you can barely read, but this is one of the things we use for outreach, printed, because everybody doesn't have access to the internet, even though a lot of people have smartphones, but you can't read that on a smartphone, so we print it on paper so everybody can access it. And at the bottom, you notice there's my signature, but then there's a signature of my current partner, Reverend Dr. Jaylene Chase Sands, who is the senior pastor of a United Methodist Church. So we have an award through PCORI where we're building. The award is specifically designed to help you build partnerships. That's the whole award, which is, it doesn't sound like it should be, which is kind of revolutionary, right? To give you time to sit down and they're paying you to date. That's essentially what they're doing, right? They're helping you figure each other out, figure out if you want to go further, do you want to go steady, all right. And then the second one is an award, an engagement award, and I just sort of gave you an overview with the title and just the diagram. And so it's the Eugene Washington Engagement Award. Williams is the same sister I showed you from earlier, Kathy Williams, and Reverend Dr. Chase Sands. So we have a multi-site study. One site is North Carolina, which is the same relationships I had from when I was at Duke that have been ongoing since '07. And then we have new partners here in DC, which were an outgrowth of the work that I started when I came to, I said here, I must want to be home, in DC, which is an outgrowth of the work that I built when I got to Georgetown and sort of grew into the relationship with Reverend Dr. Chase Sands. And that award is focused on collaboratively building a curriculum to teach people in faith communities on how to do patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research. Right, so at the end of the award, we'll have this curriculum. We'll have a cadre of trained community partners, and at the center are the young people. Because our focus, I can't let go of it. My focus and my investment are in our young people and our young people of color, ensuring that they have the greatest opportunities for success. And so we have 2 young people right now who are on our advisory board. We're recruiting more. So anybody who has friends in North Carolina and DC, tell them go to the website, tell them email me, so we can try to bring them in. So finally, back to our little boy, it's possible. It's a lot of work, a lot of work, but it's possible. And then finally, I believe that ultimately, we have to build on the legacy of those who came before us. So somebody told me a long time ago, Alpha, you have to set your intention. I have said it, right? Faith-based health, mental health promotion, for me, that's it. You have to keep moving forward. One of my favorite movies, Meet the Robinsons. I love that movie. Anybody who hasn't seen it, you got to see that and Kung Fu Panda. Oh my gosh, they're the best. I cannot wait for Kung Fu Panda 3. There are no accidents. I so believe that. The old turtle was great. And then you never let up, right? So set your intention. I'll say it again for the people in the back row. keep moving forward, and never let up. Finally, I want to thank you all for your tireless efforts, your advocacy, and most of all, your kindness. And with that, I'll stop.
Wow, this is honestly such an important conversation. It's so great that it resonated with everyone. We have a few minutes for questions. I saw some hands over here coming. Forgive me, I don't move so quick. Doing the best I can.
I have a question that comes up sometimes, and it doesn't only apply to black churches or black religious people, but I hear it all the time. When you're engaged in conversation with somebody who's religious, they'll often bring up that mental illness or addiction is of the devil. How do you respond to that without alienating people?
The short answer is I don't know. Then I'll give you a politician answer while I'm trying to make up something. I can't say that I can tell you something definitive. What I will say is I always try to approach it. Somebody told me a long time ago, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so what I try to do is engage the person in the conversation about what makes them think that, right? And so if people start quoting Bible scriptures to me, I will stop them and I'll say, I understand that's your perspective, but talk to me about what you believe. Don't tell me what the Bible says, right? Because there's 50 million interpretations for stuff in the Bible, and we stone people in the Bible. We don't do that anymore. So, you can come up with a scripture for basically anything. The one that I dislike the most, wives submit to your husbands. Ooh, Lord, I don't do that. But you can find a scripture to support anything. And so what I try to say is, at the end of the day, the Bible, in any faith tradition, the Torah, the Quran, they're all teaching you, I think, honestly, about loving people.
Yes.
So how do we love them? Love them. And if I can get them sort of on that plane and away from quoting the Bible, I feel like we can get somewhere. And I think part of why people do that, I don't know, I think they're afraid. And they gotta try to, this is how they make sense of it, this is how they control it. I'm gonna call it of the devil, because if it's of the devil, then it's out of my control. But it's not out of your control. It's within your control to love that person with that mental illness. So let's figure out together, maybe partially with some of your religious beliefs, how do we get more on that path instead of, it's the devil, I gotta be away from it.
First, I'd like to say that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for bringing it. I wanted to talk really quickly about an experience I had with my friend who worked on an ACT team in the city, and for those who don't know, it's for at-risk people who can't really make it to psychologist's office because they're so inundated, and so they go to their homes. And the communities my friend would go to would be like Brownsville and Bed-Stuy and Brooklyn, which are communities of color, oppressed communities of color. But the difficulties with him is, on the one hand, he had an MSW, and so there was a higher strata of pay that he was able to get, and also it was difficult going into those places, and some people sued him, and he almost was a victim of violence, and so it's a tough field to be in. And how do you think we can higher incentivize that kind of work as opposed to the work he does now, sitting in an office and talking about things? So how do we flip that, where we give more to people who are doing the hard work and not just people who are administrators?
That's a great question. Great question. And I'm talking about politics now. I think the way that this stuff, policymakers are influenced by research. So we have to fund research that demonstrates that what you're talking about is important and useful, and most of what the policymakers are concerned with is reducing costs. So if you can demonstrate maybe there are fewer crises for a person when somebody's coming into the home to work with them, they have more stability. The doctor last night was talking about some of their, she didn't describe it this way, but they're doing community-based participatory research. the work that she described with the mobile teams where they're going out into the communities, if people can demonstrate through research, right, a randomized control trial where you have people coming into the center, somebody's gonna write this up, and you have the other ones who go out into the homes, if you can demonstrate that the people who go out to the homes have better outcomes, I think we would have a very strong chance of convincing policymakers that this is what we have to fund. And the way the policymakers go is the way the money goes, right? So if the policymakers say, we're going to incentivize this, then your funders say, okay, we got to figure out how to make this work. So that's the only thing I can think of, and I hope that directly answers your question. Okay.
Hello, my name is Randy Hill. I'm
okay. Sorry.
I'm a Native American.
All right, brother.
Tuscarora Indian, Haudenosaunee.
My grandma was Mississippi Band Choctaws.
And I was just wondering, I don't see no Native American faces here but myself, you know? And I truly believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
Amen.
You know, and that's all we are. None of us are better than the other ones. We all face our own demons. And I just want to let people know that we're still here and we're not going away.
As an African American person myself who deals with people with mental health, one of the biggest barriers I get is that I work for the band.
Yeah, right.
And so it's still hard for me to educate people of color as well. Do you have anything to, as far as papers or anything like that that I can look into?
Yeah.
So that I can have a better approach when I go.
I'll give you my card.
Okay.
Yes. And one of the things I learned at the time that I was at Duke, that's when we had the big lacrosse scandal towards the end. So what I learned was take off the white coat, and I know you don't do this, I'm just telling you what I learned. Take off the white coat, take off the badge when I go in the community, because they don't care that I'm from Duke. And I really wouldn't say it. You know, we wouldn't say it a lot. People kind of knew where I was from, but I think we can talk, but I have papers for sure.
Because I just think it's hard when we are all sitting at the table together, you know, me and the doctors and different providers, and the first thing that the person who I'm advocating for has an issue with is the fact that I'm with, you know, non-colored people, and then I come to the barrier that I'm their voice, and not there to advocate for the people
That's
that I'm
right.
serving.
That's right. We need to be everywhere, right? We can't all just be in one corner together. Everybody can't be at Howard. We got to have some people at Georgetown and some of these other places, up here, SUNY, Albany, and these other places, so we can talk. Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Matthew.
Right here.
All right. As you can see, I'm a wax.
That's all right. That's all right.
At the same time, what you don't see is the diversity of my family.
Yeah.
I mean, we are diversified in any interview you want to look at. But at the same time, I'm looking at it, and my fear is by going into a church of color, that I'm looking like the wasp, that I'm telling them what to do, and I don't want to be there. How do we diversify better?
I have the same issue, right? I'm Catholic. Like I said, it's like a unicorn. So sometimes when I, and I'm not minimizing what you're saying, so I don't want to do that. But when I go into black churches, you gotta have, I jokingly call it a papal blessing. So you gotta find the person in the church who's gonna be your right-hand person, right? So that might be somebody like our chairwoman, Mrs. Green, right? You have to have the person who's gonna vouch for you. And so we don't have any, I have not encountered any. I've had white RAs, I've had Latina RAs, no I haven't, not Latina. I've had Latina members of the advisory board, I've had Asian American RAs. We've never had any issues, because I think the main thing is, once you find, so for example, Sis Dr. Mary was for us, one of the churches we worked with. And at the time, my primary RA was an Asian American, Chinese American woman. So after I had Dr. Mary's blessing, when Michelle came with me, it was like a package deal, right? Now they happen to have a kind of multicultural church, but I think the same applies anywhere. I also have to have the person who gives me the blessing to say, Dr. Alfie is okay, y'all can listen to her, that she's not the man, right? She's one of the good ones. She worked for the man, but she's all right. So I think that's what you need. You just need the person to get you in. All right, so thank you so much again.
To start the morning. And, you know, it's interesting, Mary Beth, just quick, I told the story the other night. I had an interesting experience a few weeks ago when I was invited to speak at Syracuse University. And I thought I was be talking about mental health on campus, which is something I can speak on. And turns out I was presenting to all the African American sororities and fraternities. And there were about 200, kids in the room. I was the only white person. I said, got up there and I started to go, first, just kind of a disclaimer, I'm sure you don't want to hear about stigma in the African-American community from a doofy white guy, so I apologize. But as I was telling the story and as we were talking, it was the most amazing, transformative experience, I had a gentleman get up, got bigger than me, tears in his eyes, and he said to me, "You're my brother. It's not about black and white. Your story is my story." We talked about how he had to tell his family about his anxiety, and he was afraid his father was going to say, "I'm going to smack that anxiety right out of you." And this is true, it is. Tearing up and crying, people can be like, and it's what Dr. Alfie was saying. Just be genuine, be real, be honest. If I went in there and tried to act like an African American, they would have run me right out of town. But be who you are, be genuine, show that you care. And we all have a level of understanding with each other, so. One other thing I want to piggyback on what Dr. Alfie was saying, and this is also a true story. The way she was talking about Twitter and the importance of social media, the way I actually came to know Dr. Alfie was we were on an NAMI'S Twitter chat on schizophrenia, and we were kind of saying the same things, and then we kind of got off into a side chat where we were talking. You remember this?
Yeah.
And I said, "Who is this Dr. Alfie? What is this coma project?" And I looked it up, I was reading it, and I remember I called Cecile, our conference chair, I go, "Cecile, you're not going to believe this. We need to get this doctor here. This is what we've been talking about." So I've been saying it all weekend. The power of social media, the power of Twitter. We would not have had Dr. Alfie here today if we weren't engaged in Twitter and building our networks. And I highly encourage all our affiliate leaders too. The relationships you can develop from participating in NAMI'S Twitter chats. They happen about bi-monthly. We always post them. We post them in our e-news, on our social media, Facebook, Twitter. Participate in them. They're so important. You get great information, and every once in a while you get a great relationship out of it. So again, we have our I will listen signs. We're encouraging everyone, write your name on it, post it out. NAMI New York, get Con 15. I see people are starting to use it, but we need a lot more. Get active, get social, build our network. And we're just about ready to start our next session. Is Dr. Sowers here? We ready? All right, so I'm going to call up our Vice President of our board, Dr. Steve DeVorn, to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Our next talk is going to be on person-centered, recovery-oriented treatment interventions. And our speaker is Dr. Wesley Sam.
About physical, but there's also obviously emotional health, social health, intellectual health, all kinds of ways that we, in domains of function that we can think about. On the other side of the coin, there's disease, illness, and disability, and there's a distinction between those. Disease is a process that may lead to illness, but not necessarily. It's usually attributable to organs or some kind of to external pathogens or deterioration in internal organs. But illness is a loss of health, and it's not feeling well, and that's different from disease itself. So one might have a disease and still be healthy. Disability is the result of illness and a diminished capacity to do the things that we would like to do. So recovery is another way that we've kind of come to think about restoration of health. And it consists of various elements that support health and allow us to return to health in some cases. It's about developing resiliency, about the capacity to get through adverse circumstances. And kind of think about it sometimes as a bridge between illness and health. It's that path that we take. And stress is kind of opposes that process, and sometimes becomes overwhelming, right? And it's kind of a bi-directional process when that stress becomes overwhelming. So one of the things that we want to do is figure out how to maintain health and the things that allow us to do that, and also how we prevent regressing back into illness. Healing is something that we take for granted. You know, you kind of get a cut and a big gash, and you know, over the course of time it just sort of disappears and we forget about the pain, and there's really very little less left behind in most cases, sometimes a scar, but it doesn't hinder us from getting on with our lives. And in mental health, I think the wounds we sustain are things that cause us distress. And what happens over the course of time is that those are replaced by well-being, or at least that's what happens in a recovery process. Sometimes it's just manageabilities, though, and that's sort of, there's still a scar or symptoms that remain, but not enough to prohibit us from enjoying and having a satisfying life. So when we talk about relationships, they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, and some are a good fit, some are not so good, but they are in many ways how we define ourselves. And they're significant determinants of how we feel and how we behave. They're very often what give our lives meaning and purpose. And their absence may lead to despair. So when we talk about healing relationships, these are relationships that fit pretty well. And they sort of guide us over this bridge from illness to health. And they can ultimately restore our sense of meaning and purpose. I'm going to just kind of talk about some of the different types of relationships that we have. And family is one of the fundamental bonds that we have. And it's actually sort of an unchosen one, right? We don't choose our family members. But it's a very powerful attachment, and it can be either positive or negative, but that bond is always very strong. It's a source of support and nurturing, but there are cases when it can be a potential source of confusion and threat as well. And it's where we kind of get our first understanding of power politics, who's in charge. And so it's a really important part of the array of relationships that we have. Friends are also come into the picture as we mature, and they're created relationships. They're relationships that we form based on elements that we find attractive, perhaps, and so we have some choice in these. They kind of determine our sense of belonging or alienation. And in many cases, if that sense is one of being alienated, loneliness can come from that. They also kind of define our place in the pecking order, whether we're dominant or submissive, and we begin to find where we fit in that spectrum. Associates are another type of relationship. They're often unchosen, again, and they come through social activities. It may be work, school, sports, recreation, a number of things that we may be involved with. And they're fairly complex power relationships in many cases, and they can be kind of mixed roles, so that sometimes our associates are also our friends. So intimate partners is, they're probably provide the greatest intensity of both pleasure and pain in our lives, both physically and emotionally. And they're relationships that tend to evolve over time. They tend to be very long-lasting relationships, at least in some cases. But they're full of these great distortions. So right here we have these kind of glasses that we see things through. She says, "Good morning, Brad." He says, "Good morning, Eddie." But you know, it's just sort of interesting how those distortions actually change over time. And so they tend to, you know, in the early stages, we tend to be infatuated and we're all selfless and we kind of distort people very positively. But over the course of time, it often kind of deteriorates and it becomes a little bit more self-focused and we distort our partner in a negative way. And so it's something that we really have to pay attention to as we go through these relationships and hopefully find ones that last. But they're really characterized by, again, a kind of a balance of power and who has control, who wants control, and how that really plays out. They often reiterate or mirror earlier relationships that we've had in our lives. So I want to just turn then now to think about what makes these relationships healing relationships. And these are obviously relationships that give us hope, support, that we can feel comfortable in, that we feel that people care about us, we're respected, understood, and that they are very tolerant and forgiving and honest. And so, you know, those are, that's a lot to ask from a relationship. And, you know, we may find these relationships in a number of places. And we need to be aware, too, that it's a bit of a two-edged sword. That, you know, the relationships from family, friends, partners, and professionals can be very positive and nurturing and healing. But they can also be toxic in some places. And so part of our task in terms of finding health and happiness is sorting out those relationships that hurt from those that really help us. As I said, you know, one person offers sort of a limited capacity to affect healing. And well-being usually arises from a much broader context and a series of relationships. And part of the issue is that we want to avoid putting all our eggs in one basket. When we do that, we become quite vulnerable and we don't have a strong support system. So, what's the impact of illness? So when we become ill, we have a reduced access to various healing relationships in our lives. We may be socially have social discomfort. There may be internal preoccupations. There may be an altered or a distinct view of reality. Irritability may be a factor. But we could kind of go on with that list. But most of the potential sources for healing or helping are not in play in those kinds of situations. So here's this cartoon. It says, I was only invited for one reason. And he has a bunch of phones plugged into it. And so it's this idea, you know, when we become ill, we kind of have these ideas and start to really doubt how people feel about us. And it kind of reflects our own internal doubts. And we feel unappreciated in many cases, undervalued. We might feel used, but we don't feel included. We don't feel as if we're part of the, you know, kind of broader social interaction. And this one, it says, you can't get back to normal if you never were normal. And, this is funny and not funny in a way, because, for many people who have suffered with illness most of their lives, this sense of what is normal and how I can fit in is really a significant issue. And so, this idea of kind of being alienated, not having a place where one fits is very distressing. So, well, I'll switch a little bit now to talk about the role of professionals. And often when people become ill, these relationships are created, and they become really important as the other sources of relationships and healing relationships are diminished. For those people who don't have supportive families or other supports in their network, they may be the only significant relationships that they have. They can be provided by a spectrum of providers, and there's some variability in how much time and what kind of skills various professionals can bring to that. But in any case, when working together, hopefully there are ways that that healing process can begin. Just like other relationships, though, some of these professional relationships can be positive, and some can be actually pretty negative. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is where psychiatry fits in this, where it's been, and hopefully where it can go. So there's been like this real evolution in medical care. And there's a variety of forces that's kind of dictated the way medical care is provided these days. There's economic forces, there's political factors that all come into play. And I'm not going to go through all of those. I'm sure many of you are aware of them. But, the end result has been that there's been a general dissatisfaction with the kinds of services people are provided. There's a dissatisfaction from the people providing services as well. And I think that's true of physicians in most cases, that they feel that there's a diminished opportunity for interaction. And I think both sides of the relationship kind of feel this, that, they're looking for a relationship, but they don't have the time, or there's other constraints that kind of get in the way of developing that relationship. So, I want to take a look, well, first of all, here, it says your appointment with your doctor is 11:15, and his appointment with you is at 12:15. So, that's a little bit of the feeling we get when we go to see the doctor sometimes. There's this other cartoon that I use sometimes, where, a person's standing there, he's kind of in one of these gowns that's open in the back, and the doctor says, humility, oh my goodness, humiliation is a very important part of this process. So anyway, the roots of healing. So, what happened, what did people do before there were doctors? They got along pretty well, actually. There were community healers, there were herbalists, there were bloodletters, bone setters, medicine men of various sorts. And the things that they provided were not scientifically informed. Often they were sort of anecdotal, based on anecdotal evidence, coincidental cures, and they just sort of generalized those things that seemed to work, and they continued to do them, and actually sometimes got pretty decent results. So it sort of begs the question, why were they respected, and what made them effective? I'm going to leave that hanging for a minute and take a look at a little bit closer in history in the last century, and particularly the beginning of the last century. General practitioners were the docs that were the major source of care, and they were often embedded in communities. They had a limited number of medications, and most of them were sort of dubious value. They did bone setting, they did deliveries, they did palliative care in many cases. But they weren't all that much different from some of the traditional healers from the past. And so again, you know, why were they respected and effective? And it's kind of a, you know, it's kind of a redundant question. You know, you kind of, I don't know how many of you remember Marcus Welby, MD, the TV show. Well, you know, he's sort of this paradigm of virtue in the community, and, you know, this idealized version of what the general practitioner was. And so what it really amounted to these were people that were part of a community. They were self-sacrificing. They had relationships with people in the community. They fostered a sense of hope, and of those things were really they were really powerful. And when we believe something is going to work, there's a very good chance it will work. And you know, that's why, you know, draining somebody's blood sometimes made them feel better, even though it was really, you know, a destructive thing on a physiological basis. So this one thing that's really important when we think about these relationships is how we help people develop a belief and a faith, you know, that what comes from their interaction with a provider is actually going to help them. So there's been a variety of sources for this change. There's been a you know, huge scientific advances. You know, we know much more about the biology of illness. We've developed a variety of pharmaceuticals to kind of interact with those biologic systems. We have laboratory tests. We have a health insurance industry. And, you know, health insurance has changed quite a lot. Costs have risen. You know, it used to be that was a real security blanket. And whatever we needed, the insurer would pay for. But it's really become something quite different. And they're sort of our adversaries rather than our friend in the way that we think about it. But it's not all their fault. Obviously, a lot of this has come about because healthcare has become a lot of a business. We've kind of left the delivery of healthcare in many instances to private enterprise. And so there's this profit motive that's kind of crept into the system. You know, there's a lot of pressures to produce revenue. There's administrative expenses because of this adversarial relation. Solutions to the problems that come into the office. Our medical education has tilted us that way. But we also have developed sort of a culture of medication, right? That, you know, you can't turn on TV without seeing about 50 million ads about medications. And it looks like they all work great. You know, they just whisper all the side effects that, you know, you might experience while you're looking at people bouncing around at these feasts, you know. So, I mean, that has really had an impact on our culture and the way we think about what makes us feel better. It's not so much the relationship, it's not so much the reassurance, it's, you know, kind of taking the pill. So here the cartoon says, ask your doctor if taking a pill to solve all your problems is right for you. We need that. So how has this affected psychiatry? Well, you know, psychiatry has kind of wanted to be part of the club. And so, you know, all the other kind of medical specialties seem more medical than psychiatry. So psychiatrists tried to become a little bit more medical and kind of get, you know, a little bit of a boost in the status rankings. But it's also kind of reduced the scope of training and the kinds of skills that we develop for our young psychiatrists. There's been a focus on medication and biologic treatments. And that, again, has impacted the relationships that we have with our clients. And, you know, another issue that our system has encouraged is really a focus on illness rather than a focus on health. So we're trained to treat illness, but we're not trained very well to help people figure out how to stay healthy. That's coming there? Okay. So technology-oriented care, it's sometimes called the medical model, but I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. But anyway, that's kind of how it's evolved. And it's really this emphasis on technology, and biologic treatment, kind of real objectivity. In medicine, it's all the, kind of diagnostic tests. If you stub your toe, you get an MRI. And, there's, this huge expensive medication, all the, kind of fancy life support systems that we've developed. In psychiatry, it's a little bit more tilted towards the use of medication. We have all these new forms of delivery of medication, sustained release, and all kinds of permutations. We have vagus nerve stimulation, we have transcranial magnetic stimulation, we have ECT. All these things are kind of part of what is technology. And, so this approach has felt a little bit more impersonal. Again, a focus on disease, and more directive, paternalistic, and in many cases detached. So here it says, I question your choice of locations. He's trying to sell men's suits. And so, part of what we have to think about is what is the context of care. And often we forget about that context. We might have very good products, but if we're trying to sell them in the wrong context and in the wrong way, they're not likely to be bought. So, I presented that technologic model, but how do we really practice medicine? The technological orientation is kind of an extreme vision, and really, humanism is alive and well in medicine. It's what really draws physicians to the profession, and what they really yearn for in many ways. But we have really failed to articulate an alternative vision for medicine and for psychiatry. And it's important to return to our roots and to figure out how to make this relationship, or put this relationship back into practice. So what's been happening recently is there's some reason for hope on the horizon. And this started with the Crossing the Quality Chasm report of the Institute of Medicine in 2001, and the President's New Freedom Commission report in 2003, really focusing on person-centered care and recovery as important aspects of treatment and how our systems need to evolve. So, how has this idea evolved? It's not actually new over the past 14 years. There's always been this tension between segregation and assimilation of people who suffer from illnesses. And there's this competition between fear and empathy when we think about how our society treats folks. So fear usually wins, and what we have is a lot of stigma, prejudice, separation, and alienation that has been a result of that. It's been really hard for people who have suffered with various kinds of illnesses to feel again a part of the community. But recovery approaches actually go back quite a way. Even when we segregated folks primarily in asylums. Asylums were originally conceived of as sort of places of rest and reconstitution. And actually moral treatment incorporated many of the things that we think about as part of person-centered care today. It was a community, people were engaged in productive activities, They were treated with kindness and respect, and they were encouraged to be self-sufficient. And many of those folks, under those circumstances, returned successfully to the community. And this was obviously before the days of medication and technology. So where does the term come from? I think, we can kind of go back to the 1930s with the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous, and also the teaching of Abraham Lowe. Through the 1950s, the 12-step programs really grew, and they did so apart from professional leadership or collaboration. Recovery Incorporated was the organizations that formed from the teaching of Dr. Lowe, and it had a more collaborative perspective in terms of its interaction with professionals. 12-step, though, really exploded and kind of grew exponentially. It was based on the idea of mutual support, being part of community, and acceptance, tolerance, and a welcoming, no matter where people were at with their issues. And it stressed personal responsibility. It gave people hope. They had a mentoring system that really showed people that recovery was possible. It gave them ways to think differently about what was happening to them. And it really provided a blueprint for living. And as a result, it was really started to be incorporated into professional approaches to treatment. Whoop. Wrong way. Okay, in mental health, things went a little bit differently. The Recovery Incorporated organization didn't grow in the same way that the 12-step did. And so it was existent, but not really dominant. But this idea really reemerged later in the century with the recognition that people could control their destiny to some extent. And that came in part through the consumer and survivor civil rights advocacy. The idea of a biopsychosocial approach to treatment that was developed by Engel came into play in the 1970s. Their psychosocial rehabilitation came on the scene with Anthony and Lieberman in the 1980s. There was a sort of a boost in the participation of psychiatrists in a community perspective through the American Association of Community Psychiatrists. And that was mainly through the 90s and continuing to the present, and peer-delivered services, which has been really a significant phenomenon in our own new millennium. So recovery today is really a transformative process for behavioral health systems, and it's really what has dictated many of the policy processes that have been taking place. There's really been a coming together of 12-step approach to recovery and what we might call the mental health approach to recovery, and we're beginning to understand that they're really not different. So there's universal aspects of recovery that really we can all use. They're not really confined to those who have some kind of mental or addiction type of disability. So hope, autonomy, community are all pillars of this recovery concept and lead to growth and fulfillment. So in this cartoon, the girl says to her parents, "All I ask is a chance to ruin my life in my own way." And so, we all need to be part of the solutions to the problems that we encounter. And very often when we're told what we're going to have to do, we do just the opposite. And, so the understanding that, we get is that, there is a certain amount of risk, and we all do make mistakes, and hopefully we learn from those mistakes so that we can, I'm not sure what happened here. I don't know if that was a sign from God.
That was the last one.
Get off the stage. All right. Anyway, so what's recovery-oriented care or person-centered care? It's an approach to service that really gives, again, people a sense of hope and purpose, developing a personal role in creating solutions to the problem that they face, giving them a sense of purpose and meaning. It's about relationships and the strength of that relationship and giving people power to contribute to their own healing process. So we kind of have these two extremes, right? The technology-oriented and recovery-oriented approaches to care. When you think about some of the things we've been talking about, this whole idea of what we did prior to technology is strikingly similar to what we're talking about with this person-centered approach to care. Really, you know, again, as I mentioned, that relationship-based care and commitment to community service is really what draws people to the profession. And so one of the things that we need to begin to do is to recognize that technology can really serve those ideals if it's used properly. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So when we think about the future of psychiatry, we need a new vision. And that vision is one that really integrates those two kinds of approaches and emphasizes the relational aspects of care. We need to recognize the power of hope and belief in healing and a new role for ourselves, not so much as the boss, but one of being an advisor, a coach, a partner, and in many cases a friend. Whoop. Okay, and so sometimes that may feel a little uncomfortable. So it says, okay, but just this once. So this is part of the challenge, you know, it's helping psychiatrists to think about things in a new way and their relationships in a new way. So another big piece of this kind of new vision is integrated care and the recognition that there's a significant interaction between body and mind. Health is critical to mental health, and so when we think of this kind of interaction of physical health and mental health, they're really bound pretty tightly together. And so when we think about recovery planning and how we get to a recovery, various aspects of health need to be included in that planning. So what's the role of technology? Well, you know, obviously it has its strengths, but it also has its limitations. And, you know, there's no doubt that some of the advances that we've had in technology have been very impactful for many, many people. So when they're used appropriately, they can have an important role in the healing process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the recovery-oriented use of medication. And when we think about this new model then, medication use is really a personal choice. And there's some situations, obviously, when people are not in a position to make good choices or to think clearly about the choices they have in front of them. But, you know, when that is the case, we want to employ things like advanced directives and do all that we can to successful use of medication usually requires the sharing of information and decision-making. Again, if we just tell people what to take, they are not necessarily likely to do it. And I don't know how you take medicine, but, you know, when I prescribe something, when I feel a little bit better, I stop taking it. And, you know, and even staying on schedule with medication is a real challenge sometimes, even if you're only taking one. And so we need to understand this, and we need to really get people involved in thinking about what they can do and what kinds of things will work for them. Everything that all the solutions that we may come up with involve some degree of risk. We don't always we're not always able to predict what the outcome is. And so that's something that we understand, that every decision comes with risk, and if we don't choose correctly, at least we can learn from our errors. So why is this important? Again, this interaction and collaboration is what fosters trust. It creates investment in whatever course of action is chosen. It promotes self-reliance and responsibility, and it provides opportunities to learn. Where'd that come from? Well, that one's out of place. I don't know. But anyway, so some of the challenges to this model are, we've kind of talked about earlier. Time constraints. There's challenges to establishing trust, just due to symptoms and mental functioning at various times. There may be cognitive, emotional impairment. There's also this perception that, the doctor is there only to prescribe medication. So those are things that we need to overcome. There are ways that we can do that, even within limited time periods. So, we can employ pre-visit questionnaires that help us gather information. We can collaborate with other providers. And that all allows us more time to take time for this relationship, which we believe is so important. So, we need to recognize that doctors can't really work very effectively in isolation. We need a multi-dimensional approach, and we need to partner with other providers and professionals, and that's really critical for success. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just take a little bit of time to talk about the Recovery to Practice curriculum. And in 2009, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, developed a grant, and 6 different professional groups were chosen to develop curricula that really help move their profession towards a more person-centered approach towards treatment. And one of those groups was psychiatry. And so we developed a curriculum for recovery-oriented care in psychiatry. Dr. Annelle Prim, who some of you may know, was the director of that project when she was at the American Psychiatric Association. And I was the co-director as a representative of the American Association of Community Psychiatrists. The goal was really to equip psychiatrists with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to provide recovery-oriented psychiatric care in which they work in partnership with people in recovery and to assist them in achieving their goals and living a fulfilling life in the community. So in order to put this together, we developed various partners. We had an advisory group that were made up of people in recovery, psychiatrists in recovery, and other mental health professionals. There was a work group at the American Psychiatric Association that supplied staff. There were various community psychiatrists and people with lived experience. So we spent a year just really gathering information from literature, from every kind of psychiatrist you can imagine, people in recovery, other professionals. We did this through conference call, face-to-face meetings, focus groups, and so on. And we came up through that process with some recommendation for training experiences to connect with participants' prior knowledge and experiences, to demonstrate recovery-oriented practices that address common clinical challenges, to focus on how to use recovery principles in real-life situations, and really to involve people with lived experience as trainers and family members as well, and to hear people's recovery stories, and that really needed to be part of the training process. I did that again. Okay, I got this. So in this slide it says, scientists confirm today that everything we know about the structure of the universe is wrong. And so this is a little bit of the challenge. You know, nobody likes to hear this. And so psychiatrists, you know, are a little bit threatened when they're told that everything they've been doing is wrong and the way that they've been kind of conducting their practice isn't the way to go. And so, you know, one of the challenges is really to find a way to deliver these messages in a way that isn't threatening and that really invites doctors, psychiatrists to understand that this is not only a benefit to the people that they treat, but it's a benefit to them. And that if they employ, you know, some of these principles, they're going to be more satisfied, and their career is going to be a source of more pleasure than pain. So what's the target audience? It's pretty broad. So psychiatrists in training are the group that we especially want to influence, early career psychiatrists, public and community psychiatrists. And in order to do that, we need trainers and supervisors that can guide them and give them guidance in as they progress. So we need people in training programs and clinical supervisors to be exposed to this. And the goals of training, again, are to familiarize psychiatrists with the principles of recovery-oriented practices, the benefits for individuals and for themselves, and practical strategies for clinical settings. So I'm just going to run through real quickly what are contained in these modules. The first module is an introduction and rationale for this approach. The second is how we create welcoming environments and engage in relationships. The third is person-centered planning and shared decision-making. Fourth, developing peer supports and working with peer specialists. 5 is the role of medication in recovery. 6 is health and wellness-focused care. 7 is developing living skills and using natural supports, and this, of course, includes family members. Culturally appropriate care, and trauma-informed care. And so those 9 modules make up the core of what this curriculum contains. And they're contained in PowerPoint slides that reside on the internet. And people can look at these and view them independently. But what's more effective is usually a direct live presentation where people can really discuss the content of these with one another after they're presented. And so, you know, it provides an opportunity for interaction and for a respectful consideration of the things that people may feel threatened by or may not be comfortable with. So we hope that that process is thought-provoking and it really allows the dialogue about how we can be effective and move towards this new model of care. So in the direct method, participants are introduced to the curriculum by facilitators. There's again, after the slide presentation, there's a discussion. The slides are kind of neat because they're narrated and they have some video embedded in them. But they do raise some issues that may be controversial. In addition to that, there may be discussion of case material, and they usually last between 60 and 90 minutes. So you can do this in various ways, and one of the real challenges sometimes is getting docs together to do trainings. But so we could do them in chunks in some cases, of 3 to 5 modules in a day. They may be done in a series for residency training, for example, where there's set didactic times. It might be mixed formats where, some of the modules are delivered under the direct method and some are just viewed online. But in any case, one of the things that we have really encouraged and try to insist upon is the need for involvement of people in recovery. So these modules haven't yet been rigorously evaluated for effectiveness, but our anecdotal feedback has been very positive. We need some technical improvements in some of the audio parts of the modules, but for the most part, they're easy to watch, and people have found them very interesting. And they've really stimulated some very good and active discussions of how this can all play out in practice. So, this is a little bit, how some psychiatrists feel again. We kind of need to learn to swim in new waters, and not always the one that those that we're used to swimming in. So we also want psychiatrists to be able to get a sense of how they're doing with this. And so we developed something called the Psychiatric Recovery-Oriented Practices and Evaluation Rating. And so it's an opportunity for psychiatrists to rate themselves in various aspects of recovery-oriented care. And there's also a scale for them to be rated by their colleagues and supervisors. And there's a third scale for them to be rated by the people that they serve, their clients and, in some cases, their clients' families. And so they can really compare their own perceptions of how they're doing with this to those that they're working with. And, they hopefully won't be too distinct, but I think that sometimes people will find that they are. And so, they're done prior to the training, after 6 or 8 months, to just kind of see how things have changed and how perceptions have changed. It's really a self-rating tool, so we haven't done any validity testing or anything on this, but hopefully it's something that's going to be useful. So the real challenge now, after the grant is finished, is how we're going to disseminate this and how we're going to get psychiatrists around the country exposed to this so that they can begin to think about making changes in practice. We are trying to organize various regional trainings, and we can do this through psychiatric organizations and sometimes inter-agency continuing medical education programs. We want to kind of get some of this embedded in all the residency training programs. And we need to have faculty champions, people who can really deliver this to residents in their schools. So part of what we need to do is raise awareness. We've had to raise some money to do that, and so that's part of the challenge as well. We've trained a number of facilitators, about 30 pairs so far, and again, we want to get a wide diversity of facilitators available across the country so that we can begin to spread this curriculum. So it's challenging, this is a big country. There's a lot of geographic diversity and space that we need to fill up. Money is going to be a big issue. We do have some additional support from SAMHSA, but it's a little bit limited, so we're kind of struggling with that and trying to find new sources of revenue so that we can train more facilitators and we can do more training in various places. Transportation is part of that expense. We need to often bring people in. When we do these trainings, we train psychiatrists and their peer partners in conjunction with each other. So often it is a slight expense to bring all these people together. We've kind of relied on volunteerism, and that can only stretch so far. If we have a big enough pool, we can certainly rely on that to some extent, but when people are giving significant amount of times, they often need to be compensated. And so there's a lot of competition for space and training programs as well, and so that's another challenge that we need to overcome is figuring out how we can get young psychiatrists exposed and kind of buying into these changes. So just summing up, it's critical for us to begin to think about health rather than focusing just on illness and keeping people healthy. The importance of developing relationships as part of the healing process. And we need to develop a new vision for psychiatry that really is a hybrid of technology and humanism. And we hope that this curriculum, the Recovery to Practice curriculum, can be a bridge to health for our own profession. And we have some challenges ahead, but we hope we can meet them. So, just ending, I hope I haven't said so I hope you all were able to stay awake, and I think we have some time for any questions or comments that you have. I don't know.
He's asleep.
Go ahead. You're right by the microphone.
I don't know. Does it work? Yeah, it might be a switch.
Is ready?
Yeah.
It's good? Okay. It's great to hear that psychiatry is going to be taking a different approach. I'm the son of a clinical psychologist, trained psychoanalytic, Freudian, and there's always barriers between patients, which I'm thankful and I'm proud to say my father did not buy into at all. And he said that was the one thing that was really wrong. How can you take care of someone? And I'm a physician, and I'm doing, as most of you are now aware, psychiatric internal medicine. How can you take care of someone and develop a relationship, which is really where it all starts if you have that barrier? So I tell my patients, I don't use the word consumer, but I tell them that you're people. I'm a person. We're in this together, and that's what it's all about. And it's a negotiated settlement. It's always a negotiated settlement. I mean, I have my thoughts on things, but you have to work together. And I'm glad to see psychiatry coming along into that thing. And the other point is the medical home, the model for the medical home, where everything is easy. To try to navigate the psychiatric maze, as I love to use that phrase, and to go from one person to another. And then if you put medical problems on top of that, what we need is, well, my model, of course, psychiatric internal medicine. We need psychiatrists doing some medicine, we need some internists doing some psychiatry, and we need that collaboration. That's critical. And we need, ready? Sorry, last thing. The 4 R's of Team India. I have to throw this out there. Running, sorry, I just had to throw that in there. Really important, physical activity, guys. We want, obviously, more research, as we've been talking about. But again, relationships, it always comes back. And then recovery, guys. That's around the corner, and it can be done. Thanks.
Thank you.
So my question is, and I've often wondered this, I've gotten one response, and it's funding, but I don't want that response because I've already gotten it. So in the early 90s, it was my first hospitalization. They had a very different type of care. It was more patient-centered care, more group therapy. The psychiatrists were involved. Give you an example, like during the day, it was like group therapy, very different from today's type of group therapy. It's not educational, it was more psychotherapy. Even like the art therapy was more psychotherapy. The psychiatrists were more involved. You met with the psychiatrist for an hour. Why is it different today? Even like as far as like the setting for the patient today,
And I was in a private psychiatric hospital, so I know that has to do with it. But your own room, there was like a bathroom there, just the setting, because that does have a lot to do with it. What you're living in, the environment. So go ahead. And not funding. I don't want to hear funding.
Well, no, it's not funding, it's business. And, it kind of gets back, I think, to the fact that, the whole idea of profit and survival has kind of crept into the system. So, as costs have risen, there's been a lot of cuts. And there's been changes. The whole technology thing has really changed what has been done with training. And so that's really part of, the importance of kind of getting this back on the agenda. Residency training programs don't train psychiatrists very well, if at all, to do group therapy. We don't get trained to do family therapy anymore. We don't really get trained very well to do individual therapy. So all these things need to come back into the kind of palette of things that we have to choose from. And I think that it is a matter of perspective. And so when we try to create environments that make people feel comfortable, it's much different from when they have to deal with 20 hassles just to get where they'd like to go.
Yeah.
And so those are huge things. They're connected with funding. They're not cheap things. But we know that there are things that we can do. We just have to find the will to do them.
But I guess my thing is that if you spend more now, later on you're not going to be spending as much. And I guess one last thing. I work at a program where it's just amazing. These women that I work with, they have eating disorders. And the program is set up as such. It's almost like a hospital environment. They live outside in the community. The sharps are locked up, all the stuff. But during the day, they're exposed to I forget the name of the therapy. But they're exposed to eating skills. They're exposed to psychotherapy. They have psychiatrists running it. I mean, exactly what it was in the early 90s. And the outcome of it, because they have done research on this, it's almost 90% of the time, these women don't come back. So yeah, it costs a lot, but on the other end, it's costing less because they're not coming back.
Yeah, and I think that's the other piece that, we have really fallen down on. And part of the structure of our health system and insurance industry has kind of discouraged us from long-term investment, right? We've kind of looked for an immediate solution that often has not been sustainable. So, you're absolutely right. When we make good investments now, it's going to pay off in the future. But when we make poor ones, it really costs us more.
And I was terrified of it because I had social anxiety. And I just thought, though, if I could just get over my fear of it, I might love it. And Inner Own Voice was an opportunity through NAMI to do that. And I'm telling you, it is such a healing opportunity. Inner Own Voice has led me to this person that's standing in front of you all today, being able to do this. I was not able to 5 years ago. And thank you, NAMI, for helping me to do that with you. Shout out also because I also met Mary Beth at that time, and Mary Lou, who was part of our affiliate in NAMI MFH, which is Montgomery Fulton Hamilton, where I'm actually today a board member, and I was serving with Becky Cardinale today and Melinda McDuffie, who are basically like sisters to me. We are very close, and we've got a fiery little affiliate out there, and we're doing big things with it. And I'm very excited about that. And I also have to give a shout out to my mother in NAMI, Reba. And speaking of moms, thank you, Mom, being over there recording this. Hi. My family, my parents, and my brothers and sisters and nieces have all been extremely supportive, as well as a new member of the family who I'm about to introduce in this video that I'm about to show. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to stop talking and nervously show you this video because it's the first time. Only a couple people have seen this. And I've been presenting for quite a while now. I went from Interim Voice to now, like Matthew said, I'm presenting all over the place now. But this is the first time to be showing this video. And, well, you haven't seen it yet, so. But I hope you liked it. And with that said, I also just want to say one other thing. It's a little bit of a roller coaster. It's a 12-minute show. It's really quick, but there's lots of ups and downs. But you know what? That's mental illness. And that's life. And this is my life. So if you could play the video.
1973. That was the year I was born. In front of a team of student doctors and given a name by my parents. Jason. It's a Greek word, and it means looking back at my life, I now see that it has handed me many things to heal from. My anxiety around people, which later led to my depression. Which grew only worse as I grew older. School for me was torture. I was often alone in classes. I was targeted by bullies and held back in the 4th grade. Though I befriended a few kids in high school, I felt like an outsider. I was so stressed socially that I finally couldn't bear any longer. So I asked my parents to go to a counselor so that I could finally tell someone the truth. I'm gay. Now, alright, maybe you're wondering, what does being gay have to do with mental illness? Nothing, usually. Neither subject has little to do with the other, except one common denominator. Stigma. I was a 17-year-old boy who was afraid. I feared knowing who I was. I was worried that people would think I was a perverted freak. And worse, crazy. So, thankfully, my counselor came to my rescue. And he helped me communicate my feelings for the first time. He also helped me graduate high school in my junior year. And then introduced me to a group of young adults my age who were also struggling with their sexuality. And for the first time, kids my age knew me for me. But who was I? Was I depressed, Jason? Or was Was I anxious, Jason? Or was I worse? Because as I neared 25, my mental illness symptoms got worse. What was happening to me? And then the unthinkable happened to our family. My Uncle Tom. I didn't realize how devastated I was until 6 months later. I was scared a new counselor while talking about my psychosis. He forced me to get help elsewhere, and after weeks of finding no one, a psychiatrist called back, and I was diagnosed with bipolar and prescribed an antipsychotic. The new pill was not a good match, and I became severely depressed. And like my uncle, I began to make plans to end my life. But while writing my goodbye letter at my parents' home, something stopped me. My uncle and I had a photo from a long time ago. I wanted to live. And just then, my parents miraculously came home. I asked them to bring me to the hospital. There, they changed my medications and they changed my diagnosis to schizoaffective disorder. My recovery had begun. It lasted for 15 years as I researched, learned, and constantly improved. Years of self-help later, I found recovery until Valentine's Day this year, when suddenly, for the first time in my life, I met I've been in a few good relationships throughout the years, but now that I was so healthy, I was finally ready for the one. February 15, 2015, Peter and I found each other. With the relationship piece of the recovery puzzle in place, my healing felt complete. Until we discovered Peter's own health problem. See, after a short time into our relationship, Peter began talking about feeling more tired than usual. Weeks before we met, while vacationing with family, he noticed a bump that he thought might need attention. Nervously, we went to a doctor who assured him it was just an infection. We placed him on 12 weeks of progressively stronger antibiotics. But Peter's symptoms kept getting strangely worse. So we sought a second opinion, and there we found our answer. So with our cancer down and all my recovery skills learned throughout the years, we were determined now to find Peter's healing too. Healing and recovery. How could healing possibly happen for both mental illness and cancer? I wondered. For me, mental health recovery was more than just taking a pill or talking to a counselor. Now, don't get me wrong, they were all incredibly important in my recovery story. In fact, through my 15 plus years of recovery, I've been hospitalized in a psychiatric center, seen 3 various psychiatrists, worked with 8 mental health counselors, and been prescribed and taken over 10 psychotropic medications. Finally, though, I found my best fit of 2 medications that I continue to take today. Those traditional medical therapies were very important to carrying me to this healthy place now. And I like to think of them as the foundation to my mental health recovery. However, I realized I shouldn't stop there. I continued to keep building up from that foundation. Let's face it, human beings are incredibly complex organisms. Though I wanted there to be a quick fix, doesn't everybody? For me and my mental health challenges, there was more that had to be done. So I began to think of mental health recovery as a lifestyle. It's sort of like diabetes. You may need to take medication or medicine like insulin, or change the way you eat, or exercise, or find the support of others and more. So I did just that. My medications worked, and I discovered a special diet too. And exercise also boosted my mood. And then I researched supplements, and some really worked. And coping skills even helped when outside stress got rough. All of these work so beautifully together that I just didn't feel ill anymore. My open mind helped me find recovery. Peter's open mind is now doing the same. He's taking the prescribed medications and treatments, but we're doing more. We eat a similar diet that fights chronic illnesses. And we research all the time for complementary therapies. Today, this is Peter. He's better. And this is me. As my name says, I am healed. I think anyone can. Thank you so much. Really, it means a lot. I don't know if we should maybe wait until Hakeem, if you want to go, and then we'll have questions and answers after, or does that work, man? Okay, thank you so much for watching that, guys.
So moving, and we're so lucky to have Jason and Marcia, and now Peter as part of our NAMI'S family. And as Jason said, before we get to Hakeem, I'm going to do a little transition here. He's so blessed that he has an amazing family. I've gotten to know Marcia and his brothers and sisters. I look forward to getting to know Peter. And But many people who are struggling with the issues that Jason had, being gay and having mental illness, they don't have that support. And you know, NAMI always wants to address everybody. We're very lucky this afternoon at 5:45 to have a workshop session with Dr. Christian Huygen, who I know he's here. So, oh, there he is. Dr. Huygen's doing incredible work with the Rainbow Heights Club in Brooklyn, really revolutionary stuff, and he's going to be talking about how we can support our loved ones who have both mental illness and gay, lesbian, transgendered issues. They have a whole unique set of circumstances, as Jason kind of touched on. So please, if that impacts your family, you just want to learn more, it's going to be a fantastic session. So next up, another person who I'm really honored to call my friend. One of the best experiences I ever had at NAMI was going around with Hakeem Rahim to schools in Albany. We went to the Leadership Academy for girls in downtown Albany, and they gave special presentations in class. And at first the kids were like, oh God, a special presentation. They were twiddling their hair, thumbs, rolling eyes. Hakeem started talking. Hakeem told his story, and you saw an arc in these kids. It's like nothing I've ever seen. They were drawn into him, and at the end they got up, they started telling their stories, things they never told their friends before, and they had such a attachment to him, such a connection with him. It was amazing to see. And I know we still have some guidance counselors from Gilderland, from Brunswick who are here with us today, and young people from all around. We have from Hunter College, Oswego College, our new Emma Willard group right here in Troy. Bring Hakeem to your school, bring Jason. These guys are doing incredible work. So one of my other thrills was watching Hakeem at the National Convention this year in San Francisco, just wow the crowd, and as I'm sure he's going to do right now. So I'm just really my pleasure to bring up my friend Hakeem Rahim.
Yet not all of them get treatment or are even diagnosed. By age 14, half of all lifetime mental illnesses begin. I wish that I had this information when I was in high school, middle school. These are crucial years because 14 through 19, this is when kids are being diagnosed or starting to show signs of mental illness. We need this education. The kids need it, the adults need it, and principals, administrators too.
We need to create an atmosphere where students feel that they can come to school and talk to people about it.
My sister, I found out was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was in college. And later that year, she committed suicide.
When teenagers get to the high school, they experience a lot of changes. With their friends, sports, hormones.
There's a lot of stress, a lot of worry. Like, you need to know your body. You need to know what you're capable of. What you're able to do, and what happens to you when sometimes you break down.
I was looking for a way to kind of cope and educate myself on mental illness.
A lot of the knowledge I have is from film, TV, and a lot of that perpetuates, unfortunately, some of the stereotypes.
Mental illness that really affects such a wide number of students, you know, there's still really a deafening silence in our schools about that.
And people always think, when you hear mental illness, they think, oh my gosh, that person's got to be crazy. And it's not at all.
Let's Talk Mental Illness is a program where I go into schools and share my story about mental health and mental illness.
I learned a lot about myths and what people think, like preconceived ideas that just aren't true.
Hakeem showed me that.
Do you believe that you can bounce back even when your back is against the wall? Do you believe that you can rise from the ruins?
Yes.
Do you believe that you can persist even when you feel powerless?
Yes.
Believe you can. Believe you can. Believe. Good afternoon. So I first just want to acknowledge Jason and the courage, and for Peter too, just to really acknowledge the courage, and that's That's what it's all about, living with a mental illness and being an advocate, and sometimes just getting up out of bed every morning is an act of courage if you're dealing with depression. Walking into a room if you're dealing with social anxiety is an act of courage. So as Matt mentioned, Hakeem Ernie, and one of my roles is being the NAMI Queens Nassau Let's Talk Mental Illness presenter. And I'll get into a little bit more about that role in a little bit. So that poem that I spoke is called Believe. And the theme of this conference is about redefining recovery. And sometimes when you are needing to get up out of bed and feeling like your back is against the wall, sometimes all you need to do is believe. But more than that, you have to understand something that I want to talk about right now, which is acceptance. So undergirding recovery, the foundation of recovery, I believe, is acceptance. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So first, you see on the screen, that's what that's called, on the screen, you see we are a social media generation. So all our social media advocates who use Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, what I would like you to do is pull out your phones if you have that. I think we're all really comfortable doing selfies and like, oh, I look good. But if there is something that really moves you, that you've heard in Jason's story, that you heard throughout the conference, what I urge you to do and encourage you to do is use the hashtag #I'mAcceptance. Tag myself if you would like, NAMI Queens Nassau and NAMI New York State. We have to spread this message of recovery and change the narrative of what it means to live with a diagnosed mental illness. So if you're up for that, let me hear a round of applause for you two. So regarding acceptance, I believe that there are 3 keys to acceptance. And by the time we leave here this afternoon, we will be united under that banner of acceptance. And under that banner, I say there's 3 key things. The first is to say that it is okay. What I'd like you to do for me, I know Dr. Alfie was here earlier and she brought it to church. So that's the call and response tradition. So what I'm going to ask you to do is say it's okay. It's okay. Speaking and acknowledging and saying that I might have a diagnosis is an intentional acknowledgement. Speaking and saying that it's okay is a bold act. I might have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Let me go and get that checked out. Accepting that is a powerful act. There's nothing passive in saying that, you know what, I need to talk about something and I might have a diagnosis. So I want you to say with me, say it's okay. It's okay. The second key around discovery is saying that there is no shame. Say it's no shame. No shame. Saying that it's okay is one part, but you must do more than saying it's okay. You need action. Once you can speak, you have to move forward and act. So saying that there's no shame in seeking help opens the door for action. So say there's no shame. The final point, that final key I would like to make is that there is hope. You guys know what to do. Once you say that it's okay, once you go forward and seek help, acceptance opens the door for possibility and hope. It lets that wall fall down for you to walk around it. It's not easy. Trust me, 15 years of living with mental illness has proven to me that this journey is not easy. And I know about shame, and I know about stigma. In 2000, as a sophomore at Harvard University, I was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. On campus, I had a full-blown manic episode. I saw Jesus. I heard car engines talking. Alex Trebek from Jeopardy was giving me instructions. Clearly, when Alex Trebek is talking, he's the most boring person speaking. But Alex Trebek spoke to me. And on campus, my roommate called my family. And thank God for my roommate, because a lot of times when I used to speak at family-to-family groups, they said, man, I really wish I had someone like your roommate who called me when my son or my daughter was on campus and they were having their breakdown, they were having their depressive episode. They could not go to class because of their anxiety. So I always give thanks to my roommate, Ian. When I said that there was stigma, then I actually embraced stigma, because for a long time, up until 3 years ago, I didn't even share with some of my closest family members and friends that I had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Because of the shame and stigma, I didn't allow the people who loved me the most and who could provide for me the most, I did not allow them into my life. And that's what shame and stigma does. So we have to say it's okay. Very quickly. In January of 2013, the month that I started as the NAMI Queens Nassau Let's Talk Mental Illness presenter, I picked up my phone and I dialed my roommate, my college roommate, Ian. So I picked up the phone and I started dialing the number. My hand was trembling a little bit, not because of anything other than nerves. So I picked up the phone and I said, Ian, hey, I want to have a conversation with you. I was like, that's weird. Talk. Have a conversation. But what I told him was that this is a different type of conversation that I want to have with you. This conversation I want to have with you is to talk about what we haven't talked about for 13 years. That's when I had my manic episode on campus, when I thought I was Neo and I was running and jumping off the walls. That is the conversation I want to have with you. And over the next hour, two friends who hadn't spoken about our journey, because having a manic episode and mental illness is not only about that person with the illness, it is a collective journey, right? We had an experience together that we could not talk about for 13 years. But over the course of that next hour, because I said that, you know what, it's okay, two friends had the specter of the burden of stigma released from their relationship, and they were able to bond. Would you wait 13 years to tell somebody, I have a new job? Or, my mom is diagnosed with cancer. But you could wait 13 years before you could tell somebody who loves you deeply that, listen, I have a diagnosis of mental illness, because of that shame and stigma. And I want to ask you today, I want to ask you, are there people in your life that you haven't told, that you haven't shared, that you haven't come out to with your mental illness, that you have not embraced and said that it's okay? Sometimes if we say it's okay, we can reclaim friendships and relationships. For one of the first things I want to say to you is that if you can say it's okay, there may be some relationships in your life that you may be able to reclaim. There is no shame in seeking help. So as I mentioned, I'm the NAMI Queens Nassau Let's Talk Mental Illness presenter. All my NAMI Queens Nassau people say yay! But I love New York State, so everybody say it. So as the NAMI Queens Nassau Let's Talk Mental Illness presenter, since 2013, I've been going into high schools and middle schools across the country and now colleges. And I have to give a big shout out to Janet Sussin, who was the lead author on the Breaking the Silence curriculum. The Breaking the Silence curriculum was the platform for us to get one of the first grants to go into schools. And one of the next grants we got, and I think it's so important to acknowledge, right, and give thanks. One of the next grants we got was from the Riley family, from the Ann Allen Centrino Family Foundation. And both of them are here today, both Janet and the other Janet too. So give them a round of applause for them. So as the NAMI Queens Nassau Let's Talk Mental Illness presenter, I share those three key phrases as well. It's okay to talk about what you're going through. There's no shame in seeking help, and if you're diagnosed with a mental illness, there is hope. One talk that I gave was at a college called Malloy College on Long Island. It's in Rockville Center, about 2 turns down the block from my house. I live in Hempstead, Long Island. And one day, at that presentation, I was able to speak to both faculty and students. And in the audience, as I was talking, giving my presentation, close to the close of the question and answer section, Mother, you could see her eyes welling up with tears. Right next to her was a young man, and at the close of the question and answer, he raised his hand, he shot his hand straight up. And he said, Hakeem, I have what you have. I kind of looked and said, what's that? He said, I have that what you have. I said, what are you talking about? I have bipolar disorder. His mom burst into tears. She said, you know what? This is the first time since he was diagnosed a year ago that he admitted, that he accepted his diagnosis. Because we had that conversation and we were able to be vulnerable, he went on and actually sought help. And I spoke to his mom about, I think in August, and he said it was been a rocky road for him. Just because you say it's okay, just because you go get help does not mean the road will be smooth. But he did go ahead and get that help. He made that step. Now I ask you, where in your life, or in the lives of your family and friends, they just said, you know what, there's absolutely no shame in me going to that psychiatrist, me going to that therapist. Parents, if you have a young person in your life, when I go to schools, they say, you know what, the teacher says, that young man, he needs help, he wants help, but the parents, the mother does not want to take him to the psychologist or the psychiatrist. Where in your life, if you said that, you know what, there's absolutely no shame. It's not my fault my child has a diagnosis. It's not my fault, there is no guilt. The mental illness is something that's treatable. Let me go and help him get help. Clinicians, where in your practice, if you took the extra moment for a patient like me, who when he first had to take his medication, stood up in the doctor's office and his hands were trembling because I had just come out the hospital. He said, hold on one moment, is everything okay? I said, no. He said, sit down. Let's talk about what your concerns are. Going to seek help is not easy. But if somebody walks through that door, like Dr. Alfie said, sometimes it's only 2 chances that you have to make an impact in that person's life. If you walked one step further with them and said, sit down here, let's spend the extra 5 minutes to talk about what your concerns were. How many more people would be able to recover and say that there is no shame in seeking help? Say there is no shame. There is no shame. There is hope. There is hope. Do you know that you can be the architect of your comeback? Do you know that your deepest challenges can be the platform for your highest purpose? I laid on the couch in January spring of 2009. This is 9 years after I had been diagnosed. And I had been doing great. You know, I had a job at Hofstra University. I finished graduate school at Columbia Teachers College. I did my externship at John Jay. Had a girlfriend. You can applaud it. That was a big accomplishment. No, seriously, because listen, relationships. I've had so many family members, especially moms, say, you know, are you in a relationship now? What I take that to mean is somebody going to love my son or my daughter when I'm gone? Who's going to take care? Who's going to love them when I'm not there? So having a relationship is no small task. Is somebody going to love me when I'm not there? So I was laying on my couch, and it was the spring of 2009, and my doctor suggested I titrate, come down off of some of the medications I was on. Because he said, wow, you're on quite a number of medications. It was a new psychiatrist, and he wanted to put me on one. When we came all the way down, I actually fell down into the deep depression. Over the course of a week, my mood went all the way down. And now that spring morning, I lay on the couch, this brown suede couch, and I'd been sleeping for about 12 hours. It was about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And on the TV, I heard this guy, you could do it too. And I opened my eyes a little bit. And he was a real estate salesman. And he was driving around in a car, he had Coke bottle glasses, and he was looking into the guy. Young guy said, "You can do it too. You too can be a real estate millionaire." The light was shining in on me on the couch. And I peeled myself up off the couch, pried my eyes open, got up, walked to the house phone, and I started dialing that number. Now I'll tell you, I never used that book. Those people called me day after day after day after day. It was like, you can use coaching, you can have it too, you can do it too. But you know what? What I took from that is that in that moment, Hakeem Rahim, who wanted to be his best self, who just wanted to be okay, who wanted to recover, was still in there, even though I was down and depressed. I heard something in what he said that you can do it too, that gave me some hope. So I ask you again, do you know that you are the architect, you could be the architect of your own comeback? And I'm very fortunate I've had family and friends and loved ones that have been in my life and supported me when I did say it's okay and when I said that, listen, I do need to get help. Where do you think in your life, if you felt that you had hope, that would truly make a difference? And in closing and wrapping up, we come from all across New York State, from Syracuse, and Rochester, and Putnam County, and Troy. But today we leave united under the banner of acceptance. Today we hear that, you know what, acceptance is the undergirding, is the foundation for recovery. And today, at this conference, we are redefining recovery. Today we are seeing that, one, if we say that it's okay, if we say that there's no shame in seeking help, and if we understand that once we accept, it is not a passive act, and that opens the door for hope, so many things are possible. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing this moment, and I believe we're going to open up for questions.
I hope that this is the appropriate time to make a statement that is very dear to my heart. In this, and I wrote out what I wanted to say because I wanted to make sure I stated clearly. I hope that this pervasive atmosphere of optimism at this conference does not prevent the support of services for those for whom recovery is a distant mirage. In their paths through life, they will need supported housing, day treatment centers, case managers, the availability of hospital beds, and transitional services. In our quest for recovery, we must not define or redefine mental illness into the neglect of the chronically ill.
And tomorrow, of course, in the morning, we're so excited. We're going to have Andrew Sperling here with us from NAMI National. Myself and Denise, our government affairs chair, are going to be speaking about advocacy issues and our advocacy agenda going forward for 2016. And of course, all those things that Diana spoke about, community support, beds, transitional support, and making sure that the most seriously mental ill are taken care of. You know, mental illness is such a broad spectrum, and for some people, recovery is getting up and telling your story, but for some people, recovery is getting out of bed in the morning. And Cecile spoke about it so beautifully. And what we want to show is that what's right for one person isn't right for everyone, and everyone's recovery should be celebrated, whether it's getting up and speaking so eloquently and telling your story, or getting out of bed and calling your parents in the morning, or calling a relative in the morning. And we want to make sure that everyone's recovery is supported here at NAMI. That's really our mission, and that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. You know, recovery, I think there's a place for optimism. And I'm not saying that you don't think that there's not a place optimism. But we have to show the full breadth of the story of what it means to have a diagnosis. There's multitudes of stories out there. And we also are in a place to change the perception of what it means to have a mental illness and a diagnosis. And we have to do that from all levels. So this is not to take away from anybody's struggle, but this is showing the multitudes of sides. Because people see mental illness as violence, as homelessness, as all these different things, but we have to change that narrative. And if that narrative includes optimism, it has to include optimism. And if that narrative includes ending homelessness, that has to be included as well. So what I'm saying is that we have to have that broad spectrum.
Right, and importantly too, no one should ever be written off. I think both of you probably at points in your life have been written off and forgotten about.
Written ourselves off.
Right, written yourselves off, written yourself by others, and people thought you wouldn't be here today. And everyone has that opportunity, and everyone should be given the tools that they need to recover. And that's our job, to educate providers, educate families, not to give up on people. And recovery happens, it's possible. Again, it's not the same for everybody. But no one should be forgotten and no one should be written off.
They stole much of my thunder, but that's the key. There is hope, and no one should ever be given up on. Take care of, and other people in this room take care of some very, very ill individuals. And what gets me with the shame is, there's mental illness. It's not a character flaw. This is a biological illness, for God's sake. I have a dream. Oh my God. Sorry to borrow. Someday, when I go up to someone and we talk about our families, and I say, yeah, I'm really proud of my kids. And my son, I'm really proud of Daniel. He's a stand-up comedy and he has schizophrenia. And the next word out of their mouth is, oh, I'm sorry. I'm waiting for the time that does not happen. That people say, oh, okay, so how did he get better? What'd you do? Again, we have to change perceptions. One more point, a point of hope. In the United States, right now, 5 years out from diagnosis of schizophrenia, 15% I consider a recovery. That's not the hopeful statement. What I consider recovery is gainfully employed or being back at work. Australia, where they do have early intervention, where they do have wraparound service, where Patrick McGorry, a mental health extraordinaire, a brilliant man, was Man of the Year in Australia. They got the message. He's been doing this since 2000. Their success rate is not 15%, it's 85%. We can do this.
I want to first say, both your stories are so inspiring. And the fact that, you have bipolar, and, I'm sorry, you're diagnosed schizoaffective. They're both serious mental illness, and you're both role models for people that have those disorders and have become successful. Because too often in the media, wherever, people with serious mental illness are portrayed as being violent. I go into schools as an Ending the Silence presenter, and the last time I went into the school, I asked the high school students, and I said to them, right now, if I were to ask you, why don't you go, if you had an issue, why wouldn't you go and seek help? Their response to me was, because I don't want to be deemed crazy. I don't want to have that label of violent. And I'm amazed by your stories. My second comment is that there's hope for everyone. That everyone's an individual, whether you have serious mental illness or you have depression like myself. And I am amazed by NAMI'S conference this year. I I don't always agree with NAMI, but this conference has given me a whole new perspective on the organization. And the fact that you guys have, taken into consideration all different views, including the views of the family, people with serious mental illness, and people like myself, who aren't, are well and able to do things. So I just want to, put that out there, because I know that the last person who stood up here sounded upset, but whomever that person was talking about, that person's an individual, and they have hope for recovery too.
Yes.
And I guess the very last thing I want to say is that we don't empower people with serious mental illness enough. We keep them down here, and we don't bring them up here. And we need to do that. We need to really embrace them and embrace their skills.